Now you have a token which acts like a reverse ERC20. I own it, but I can't get rid of it. But somebody else can offer to take it off me, and then I can agree to that. And now you have a tokenized equivalent of a debt.
In the 254th Block Talks, we speak again with Keir Finlow-Bates, the Blockchain Gandalf, writer, blogger, and wizard, to learn about smart contract innovation. I'm your host, Mauricio Magaldi, and this is BlockDrops, your weekly digest on blockchain for business. These news are not a form of endorsement, sponsorship, or encouragement for consumption, and are meant for educational purposes only.
All right, everybody. I am here again after quite a while with the one and only Blockchain Gandalf. You know who he is and what he does with blockchain, so it needs no introduction. But Keir, welcome again to BlockTalks. It's really good to have you on again, and we're going to catch up on 5 years worth of things since you first came on the show. So yeah, how's it been in 5 years? You wrote quite a few books in this interim.
Yeah, I think last time I talked to you, I just finished Move Over Brokers, Here Comes the Blockchain. And we talked about that. And I've written a couple since. So not a huge quantity, one every 2.5 years. That's a good rate, I think.
Cool. So we're talking about evil tokenomics, which is concerning and hilarious at the same time. And now you came up with smart contract innovation. So let's talk about evil tokenomics first. We haven't talked about this on the record, but let's just break out. One, what was the reason why you wanted to go after tokenomics? Are all tokenomics evil?
Right. So that was by getting bitten by buying Lux tokens, which is what gave me a couple of $1,000 education in why you don't just buy tokens from a project that looks interesting to you. And I think the Lux Rare guys, maybe people who are who've joined blockchain recently don't remember the NFT craze time, but there was a platform called OpenSea that was doing very well, and they were rubbish, full of security flaws. And I have a whole bunch of LinkedIn posts about the problems that they had. And they had a guy in the executive who was insider trading as well and things like that. And then this project called Lux Rare came along, and they had a better platform. And I thought these guys could take over, and they had a token. So I bought a bunch, and it had the classic shoot up, down, bounce, and then trail off into nothing. And then I asked myself, why on earth did I buy these? And I went and looked at how token issuances had progressed over the last, this was like 2002 or so, how token issuances had gone for the last 5 years. And it was just a lot of noise and nonsense. People spending weeks discussing how many tokens to issue and not talking about why they were issuing a token, because it was this unspoken thing that it's a way of printing free money. So then I thought, Halloween's coming up. I know a great horror story. I'll write a book about an evil genius who's using tokenomics and token projects to fleece the public, and went through all the kind of things that these projects, the tricks they use, sometimes not even consciously, and sometimes because they're being manipulated by people who are using them consciously to effectively fleece retail, because that's what they're doing. And it's kind of scary looking at it now, because we're seeing, of course, the same in conventional finance, where investors invest in a company and then you get the second and third round, and then finally they have an IPO. And that's when our pension funds and we start buying in, and then you have to see where the company goes. I'm not going to name the most recent company that's pulling this stunt, but it's been all over the news and raised over $1 trillion, raised 75 billion and gave the company a valuation over $1 trillion. So this is a game that's been played endlessly. And I thought it would be amusing to look at it from the perspective of this character, Maximilian Sorneron, who is explaining how he has managed to make enough money to buy his own island with an underground layer on it. And it was short and sweet. I think it's 20,000 words. And I wrote it in 10 days. And I looked back at it a couple of months ago, and it's still an informative and enjoyable read with an underlying horror theme.
Yes, horror it is. And I came across the idea of writing books myself, but I never convinced myself of going after that idea, that project. You said you're writing an average of a book every 2.5 years. The new book is much lengthier than Evil Tokenomics, and it's more technical as well. So What's the process there for you to select the topic, to select what the approach is going to be, whether it's a short or a long form or a longer form, and how do you organize yourself to actually go after it?
Right. So it definitely is a compulsion. I wake up one day and I just can feel that I need to write a book, and I don't know why. And there are many days where I wish I didn't feel that way. And the only cure is to write a book. And quite frankly, if you don't have that urge to do it, if it's not a compulsion, then you're probably not going to get anywhere. I think all writers have these sort of dark nights of the soul where they are sitting there at the keyboard wondering why on earth they've chosen this. I can't remember who it was, but one author described it as, it's like banging your head against a wall. It feels so great when you stop. Typically what happens is that I've been reading about stuff and I've been writing articles to try to explore some concept. Maybe it's a technical one, maybe it's a business related one, maybe it's a philosophical one. And then it all starts to gel. And because I kind of think I sit on the intersection of business, technology, and kind of philosophy and psychology. And then suddenly it clicks. And then I have this literally in the space of a day, this concept of what it's going to be. And then it really is like a sort of a coloring book in that you're just shading in the spaces. You see where the spaces are, you're just filling them in. I do have to add here that there are 2 failed books between the 3 successful ones. There have been others along the way. I think one got to about 30,000 words, but then I decided it's just not working. And then you move on to the next one. And who knows, maybe I'll go back and revisit it, or maybe I'll cannibalize bits of earlier works. And of course, if you're publishing articles on places like the LinkedIn newsletter or Substack regularly, you build up a body of work that you can draw on to actually flesh out the original concept. But the concept itself is literally arises in a day.
In this exercise of you developing some of the writing, let's say in public, on LinkedIn, in long form, and now on your Substack, that exercise, does it help having people react to it, comment on it, maybe challenge you on it? What's the type of external participation, input, interaction you allow in that process? Is this core to you? Is this a nuisance? What role does that play?
It's essential. It's one of the problems I have with Substack is that you just don't get meaningful engagement on it. I get a lot of views, but there's a lot of silence. Medium is the same. You get a lot of views, you get a lot of claps or likes, but very little discussion. And this is one thing that LinkedIn, despite all its flaws, has managed to achieve, is it's built a platform where people discuss. It's, I think another one like it is Reddit. And if you don't mind living in a toxic sewer, then X has managed it too. So on LinkedIn, I think it's less now than it used to be, but it used to be brilliant for the kind of discussion you would get where people would genuinely push me or say flat out, I disagree with you. And occasionally it would change my mind. And on other occasions, it would make me examine my beliefs or my opinions and then maybe not discard them, but rather strengthen them. Say, well, I can see why they've pushed back on that. I still think they're wrong. However, I'm going to need a more convincing foundation to this than the one that I entered into. I have on LinkedIn occasionally managed to offend people. I still think there's a fairly large group of accountants out there who don't like me for some reason. So I think that's more. There are some nice accountants. I have a few on LinkedIn that I'm very fond of and that I can have a reasonable discussion with. But some of them had a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to some of my videos and articles on accountancy and blockchain. And you get the occasional kind of senior developer CTO type that I would resemble, who can have a very blunt way of telling you that they think what you're talking about is absolute nonsense that rubs you up the wrong way. So you have to kind of take a deep breath and then decide whether or not what they're saying makes sense, whether they have a point. And then if they don't, then you can just have fun getting into a discussion with them where you wind them up because you know exactly what buttons to press to irritate them.
Yeah. I mean, we could spend an unhealthy amount of time talking about the enshittification of LinkedIn. And let's not do that today. That's not the time that we have. But you reminded me of a time where the social networks were more leaning into the social side rather than the network side. Because now we're leaving just the extraction era of all of these platforms. That's why the degradation is so rampant. Now, let's go talk about your new book,
Mm-hmm.
Smart Contract Innovation, a thicker book, a book that is absolutely more technical than Evil Tokenomics. And I want to drill into the inspiration for this because smart contracts in and on themselves are the innovation that blockchains or programmable blockchains brought into the world, into the internet more dramatically in financial services, allowed an entire new category of applications, which we kind of bundle under DeFi, and a new asset class that we can bundle under tokens or tokenized versions of themselves. And we're now seeing, and I've been talking about this for a while on the show, we're seeing the institutionalization, I want to say, of crypto, right? The hoodies are being replaced by, suits and jackets and blazers and tuxedos, and everyone seems to find this very normal. I don't. But that's not about me. That's about you. So let's drill into the space in which this book came about and what is it that you're exploring in smart contract innovation.
Right. So I've been the CTO of a company called Artima for about 4 years now. And what we've been looking at is where blockchain is going to go in the future, specifically from an institutional point of view, because the early days are over. The regulators have arrived, and the sort of fun and games and fast and loose times where we saw amazing innovation and amazing fraud and exploitation at the same time are kind of both being shut down. And the sort of free exploration is reducing, and people are settling down to, well, this is the kind of thing that a bank or a financial institution or an insurer or a mortgage lender or something would need. It's time to get sensible and start providing, which of course goes against the original ideas of blockchain, which was that it was going to replace all this stuff. I think whenever you look at change, you kind of have a thesis, antithesis or antithesis, and then a synthesis. And we're going into the synthesis phase now. And it doesn't change the foundations that blockchain arose from, in that unlike our existing financial systems, with blockchain, will still have an escape capsule. Find yourself playing in the institutional pool, but there's always the ocean out there that you can escape to if you're tired of being locked into a particular financial system, which is what we don't have at the moment, because you still have to use your national currency and you still have to play by the banking rules, and more and more you need a bank account and a card or an app on your phone to just be able to participate in commerce, which we all do. Everybody needs to buy food, pay their bills, pay for the petrol that goes in their car and so on. So it's not all doom and gloom, but it's not surprising. And the institutions, of course, have revealed that the decentralization and aspect of blockchain is not of interest to them. The distributed nature is useful because it gives you robustness and replication. And it turns out that after all the laughing about, Bitcoin only has 7 transactions a second, a lot of the stuff that's come out of blockchain shows how creaking and archaic a lot of the technology infrastructure for banking is. They kind of got trapped in the same thing that, for example, Western nations did with putting down lots of landlines or lots of railway tracks before we moved on to mobile or roads. You get tied to what you have, and it makes it harder to let go and move on to something else. And blockchain has turned out for financial institutions to be that way of finally saying, let's turn our back on all these copper wires and actually start using cellular and radio waves instead. So it's kind of followed in hindsight an expected pattern. But digging into the innovation part of my book, what does disappoint me is that when you look at the innovation, there was this explosion of stuff, and then it's kind of slowed down. And in the book, I look at a number of things. I look at how we have 3 basic token types, and we are still struggling with becoming quantum secure. Recourse is being completely overlooked, and what stable coins should provide, because all the stable coins out there are running on the same code base Tether put out and then Paxos improved back in 2016, 2017. So it's kind of those 4 pillars that I'm really looking at. And so it touches on things like, how should KYC tie into blockchain? What kind of tokens do we need beyond your vanilla ERC20 or NFT token or a soulbound token? What's being missed in the question of quantum secure signing for blockchain? Why is it taking so long? And what's the big thing that's been overlooked by all the people discussing quantum security? And I even put forward a proposal of how to tackle that.
Some companies offer services, others build the infrastructure an entire market runs on. Quadra is the second kind: liquidity, routing, risk, and reporting in a single institutional layer, so banks and digital asset providers can operate with the sophistication of the world's largest players with efficiency and full compliance. Quadra will be at Faberban Tech August 24th to 26th in São Paulo, booth A1. Come find us, quadra.trade.
There were arguably the three standards you mentioned, but also a lot of different standards coming out across different variances of blockchains. You have Solana standards, you have Ethereum standards, and all the EVM world follows. You have BIPs and Bitcoin standards, you have Cardano and other programmable chains out there that have their own SIPs, MIPS, BIPs, and other improvement proposals, and they become the standards. What do you attribute this brings me back to the XKCD 927, which I will add to the show notes, which is a three-pane cartoon about standards. It's my favorite cartoon from XKCD. And standards are never done. There's always someone coming up with the standard. That's what the cartoon is about. You mentioned three, but we've seen many more emerge in Ethereum alone, but everywhere else. Isn't that the boom of innovation you were addressing before?
Yes, all these different chains have different standard documents, right, which talk about what the interface should look like. And what I'm talking about is one level deeper, right? So you may have a standard that says for a fungible token, you must have a transfer function and a safe transfer function and an approval function. And then on another chain, they may say you must have a send function and a allocate function. But when you look at the underlying concept, it's just a different expression of the same idea in the way that, Dutch, German, and Danish are different expressions of the same fundamental idea of language. And I'm saying this in comparison to, say, Finnish or Thai, not in, a Dutch person can understand a German. So even though they're speaking a different language, because there's a sort of underlying standard to that standard, a way of viewing the structure of language and vocabulary that is built off the same kind of root words and history. And so when you say that, Solana and Ethereum and Binance Smart Chain and, Internet Computing Protocol and Cardano have different standards, there's still standards for the same thing. And those things boil down to pretty much fundamentally the moment fungible tokens, where you are storing a balance against an owner, non-fungible tokens, where you are storing an index against an owner, or actually in Ethereum, an owner against an index, and soulbound tokens, where you take an NFT function and you gut it of any transfer functions so that it can't be moved. And how you want to say the API or the whatever interface you have for it functions, it's Rust versus JavaScript, right? It's almost a matter of notation rather than concept. And that's the thing that I kind of pick up on in the book, is that you see this sort of, in a sense, stagnation. Like all the stable coins being 20s plus freeze functionality plus burn functionality. And that's your stable coin. And then we're looking at 8 years of that. And they're all more concerned, of course, about the reserves and is it one-to-one backed? But there's heaps more to our financial system when it comes to digital sovereign currency transactions than how is it backed and how do you issue it and destroy it. There's a whole chapter in my book on recourse, which is that when you engage in a digital financial transaction these days, you expect to be able to get recourse if, for example, you change your mind about that online purchase, or if you've sent it to the wrong person. It doesn't always go right, but the structures are there for who ultimately is liable to make everybody whole if something goes wrong. And freeze and burn is a sledgehammer approach. If the if the FBI decides that that's a criminal and we want to lock down their account, stablecoin functionality is great for that, because you can just freeze the address, which is like freezing a bank account, and then you can burn the tokens it holds, which is like seizing them, and then you can reissue them to the FBI or Tether or Circle or whoever it is who's issued the stablecoin. And that's great when you're trying to seize funds off a terrorist organization because you want all the funds. But if you are disputing a $3 coffee purchasing transaction and your bank told you, yes, you can have your $3 back. All you have to do is close your bank account. We'll transfer the funds out to us. Then we'll open a new bank account for you and then we'll issue you your funds back plus the $3. You would look at them like they were insane. And that is exactly what recourse is in stablecoins at the moment. So one of the things I deal with in the book is how are stablecoins in the future going to deal with hundreds of thousands of recourse actions? And this is where I have to point out that MasterCard estimated in an article in a publication last year that there were going to be 880,000 recourse requests a day for the whole of the credit card industry. Now, when you look at a stablecoin and you consider that the chief risk officer and the chief financial officer have to sign off on a freeze and burn, they're not going to be able to do that for 880,000 requests a day, even if they wanted to.
And we're not even talking about agentic economy, agentic finance, none of this, right?
No. This is just the basic, I bought something with my stablecoins from you and you didn't deliver it. And I now go to the stablecoin issuer or the bank that is handling my transactions with the stablecoin and say, I want my money back under consumer law. And how do they go about that? Especially given that everyone's walking around with this idea that blockchains are immutable. And the thing is that, yes, blockchain are probabilistically immutable, but effectively immutable. The transactions are immutable, but smart contracts are a layer on top of that. So you're kind of building your extension to the blockchain protocol. And that means that you can circumvent some of the immutability, which stablecoins do already with freeze and burn. But why did they stop in 2016? Why don't we have stablecoins out there now where I can challenge a transaction, where I can claw back something if it's gone wrong, where I can get an arbitration and have it reversed possibly? And I guess the answer is they've been focusing too much on the reserve assets and how to make money off them. The technology, it works. And of course, this is classic incumbent behavior, means that it's ripe for disruption.
First, I love that you tackled on the language basis, which means that, there's a parallel between technology and language, which I love because I love languages. But I'm really curious, and I'm a sucker for use cases. Because I'm not technical, the only way I can express the marvel of technology is by expressing what it solves and how it solves it differently. When you talk about this innovation at the underlying layer of smart contracts, what were the use cases that, as you developed the concept, you came up with? Because you're not a typical tech-only CTO. Like you are in the humanities as much as you are in the sciences. So what were the ones that were like glaring when you say, oh, this validates my theory and this is worth pursuing?
Well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of innovations addressed in the book. As I said, there's a big chunk on recourse. So that's the look at what we have in conventional finance, payment processors, money transmitters, that kind of thing that we don't have in blockchain, that we kind of think we have, but we don't. So I talked about the recourse for retail consumers in a credit card-like environment. So that's a clear one. And the thing is, the banking industry is full of these kind of things. Most of them are invisible to us. A lot of the sort of bank-to-bank stuff, for example. And so their provenance is really useful. Things like, are they following the travel rule? How can I comply with the regulations? Where are the regulations going to go? And this is where you hit this funny thing where the regulators don't know where it's going to go. The banks don't know where it's going to go. And the innovators aren't thinking about banks or regulators. So they're not communicating where it's going to go. And in fact, they're quite likely to take it somewhere where the regulators are going to turn around and say, no, we don't care how amazing that is. And blockchain's been lucky so far because it's managed to fly under the radar. And there was a lot of skepticism and bankers laughing at these upstarts who thought that they could do in a decade what has taken the banking industry hundreds of years. We're going back to Renaissance times in Italy and stuff like that, some of the processes. Same with accountancy, right? I mean, it's kind of Sumerians keeping track of who owned how much grain without having to actually label each individual bag. And then we get double entry bookkeeping in. And then you've got to ask yourself, what are the big accounting innovations since then? And there have been lots of changes in rules and regulations, but rules and regulations aren't innovation, right? In fact, some would say that it's the opposite of innovation. And then we've had some technology, things like spreadsheets, calculators, so you don't have to do the numbers in your head anymore or use an abacus. You can keep track of them in a multi-dimensional array and you can have automated formulas and stuff like that. But it's still kind of having the internal combustion engine, and now we're attacking carburetors and cooling systems and fuel injection and drive-by-wire and stuff on it, but still it's still a cylinder that gets very hot because you're blowing up petrol and air in it. And this is the thing that upset the accountants when I was talking to them, was that, what is the big innovation? And none of them could really give me an answer. Or if they did, it was like the database or the spreadsheet. It's like, well, it's not specifically for your field, is it? It's not an accountancy innovation. And then they don't want to talk to me anymore. As for tokens, I have a bunch of different token extension ideas. I mean, we can cover some briefly, but I think there's 30 in the book. One clear one was, how come all tokens are an indication of an asset and not a liability, right? In accountancy, when you have your double entry bookkeeping, you have your assets and your liabilities, and they have to, I can never remember the formula, but basically one adds up to the other. And it's confused further by the fact that banks and accountants use the word debit and credit the opposite way that you and I do. We think credits are great and debits are terrible, because debits, they're taking stuff off us, and credits, they're giving us stuff. But banks and accountants see it the other way around. So I never know who I'm talking to and which one I'm supposed to use. Back to that idea. So, when you have a Bitcoin, you have a Bitcoin. You can't represent a liability where you owe me one Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain. And you'd have to get that past all the various gatekeepers to, who are intent on keeping the development of Bitcoin as slow as possible they say for safety reasons. And they have some points, but it's incredibly difficult to get a change made. On Ethereum, you can just implement it. And then I said, well, okay, I'll invent a token that represents a liability that I have, and I'm not allowed to transfer it because, you can't force a debt on someone else. You can get them to accept it. So now you have a token which kind of acts like a reverse ERC20. I own it, but I can't get rid of it. But somebody else can offer to take it off me, and then I can agree to that. And now you have a tokenized equivalent of a debt or a loan or something like that. And then that's just I'm sure when you hear that, you can start thinking, oh, I could use that to represent, how would that work in mortgages? How does that work in loans? Could it be used for accounting? Could we have liability stablecoins? So then you start thinking of all the use cases, right? So I kind of look at use cases in general in terms of here's an industry, or here is a concept that is key to an industry. Can we replicate it on blockchain? And then you start riffing on it. And I don't know whether that, for example, a liability token, if it will even take off, or whether it'll take off first in the mortgages industry, looking, for example, at mortgage consolidation in the USA, where most mortgages are traded in big bundles. And we all saw how wonderful that was in 2008. They tell us they've cleaned up their act since then. So, I mean, maybe there's something where it could be useful, right? Because mortgages are their debts, their liabilities, in more way than one.
They are. Cool. Since the last time you were here, I started probing people on their own microcosmic way of working in crypto. Because 24/7, the blockchains never stop, the markets never stop. We're pushed and pulled into this whole whirlwind of news cycles influencing whatever's happening in the industry. And you've been building on this industry for a long time. I shouldn't be asking this of a wizard, but I will. How do you keep yourself healthy and sane other than magic while working in crypto?
Well, I think for starters, I'm not trading. I'm not looking for the next big thing that's going to blow up financially in terms of a quick buck. I take a long-term view on it. So, for example, although NFTs are not significant anymore, I still think about, will there be a time when they are significant again, and what will they be when they are? And then you start looking into what kind of advances in technology would be needed to satisfy these new uses. So when you're looking ahead, it's easier to see the things often look more attractive when they're off in the distance. And, I'm thinking here, for example, of, Mount Fuji, amazingly iconic when you see it there. I imagine it's a nightmare to walk up, right? So it's that kind of, don't be looking at your feet all the time would be my thing. Sometimes you have to. But the people I see who get stressed are the ones who are worried because Bitcoin has dropped from $120,000 to $60,000, or because they didn't buy some token that has just mooned. The traders, basically. I think that's the least healthy thing you can do in crypto is act like a trader. Some people get a kick off it. For them, it's the adrenaline that keeps them alive. But I get the impression it eats most people. So my take is that unless you're that 1 in a million person who genuinely gets energized by it, just think long term. I probably should throw in some Warren Buffett quote at this point, but I won't.
We went deep. Let's go more like wider, more broad to the industry. And I, you don't have to write a book about it, but I know you have opinions about it. And I want to know the one thing as crypto as an industry, as we have this coming of age, if you will, institutionalization or the arrival of the regulators or the suit coiners. What is the one thing that we must fix right now to avoid working another decade in crypto and realizing we didn't, and therefore we didn't move in the right direction? What is that one thing and why?
It's the same thing every time, is security, right? It's the thing that always gets overlooked because it doesn't have an immediate payoff. It doesn't sell more product. It's not glamorous except to other people in security, which is kind of like, dwarves finding dwarves attractive in Lord of the Rings. It's, I think, so it's security. And of course, the big looming one is quantum, and everybody's doing a lot of hand wringing and saying, we've got to get round to this. But it's that thing again of the committee where everybody's sitting around saying, we must do something. Yes, let's have a meeting to talk about what we should do. Let's put together a subcommittee to talk about what we should do, because it's feels like a big commitment to say this is the way we're going to go. I think we're still safe. I think there's still quite a way to go before quantum computing will crack things like ECDSA and BLS, for example. But when it happens is not the point that you then want to try and fix it. And this is not Y2K, where we know exactly when the deadline is, and so we can plan around it. And as we get closer, it's like paper you had to have your dissertation for your end of year exam at university, where you know it has to be on the 8th of May. And yes, you may end up doing it all on the 6th and 7th of May, but you knew that that's when it's coming, right? The problem with this is it's more like a PhD where there's no deadline. And that's the reason why the majority of people who start a PhD never finish it, because you have to impose the deadline on yourself. And we're generally pretty bad at that, especially when there's so many shiny other things that are attracting us off. So we give it lip service. We stand up and say that it's important. And then we just go back to discussing marketing budgets or whether we should be coding it all up in Rust, things like that.
I'm with you. Now, for the folks who stayed with us thus far, what is it that you want them to take away with them as we wrap it up?
Well, what I would really like them to take away is multiple copies of my book to give to friends and family. So mybook.to/CI. I'm sure that I can convince the link to be included in this podcast. But I think the thing under that is innovation. It's anybody can innovate, and most people are innovating without even realizing it. So maybe if you go and read my book, you will see things and go, I had thoughts like that. I thought the industry might go there, and I even had some suggestions and solutions of my own that I never even bothered writing down. Write them down, discuss them with people. Maybe something amazing will come from it. I got my first patent in 3, I think, and it was a fluke. And it wasn't really until the sort of 2009, 2010 that I really got into the swing of documenting realizing that what I was doing was inventing stuff and documenting it in a proper way. For example, with a patent application or with a white paper or something like that. And I think a lot more people are capable of that than realize it. So go and read up on some stuff like that. I think you'll find it, if you're an inventive person, and many, many people are, you'll find it really satisfying, because that way you get to look back and say, I did that and that and that. In a way, it doesn't even matter if 9 out of 10 or 99 out of 100 of your ideas don't make it. The fact is, you still have that record that you did it.
As once wise man said, the journey is the destination. And with those words of encouragement, we wrap it up today. Keir, always a pleasure speaking with you, and hoping to see you the next time we're here in the Shire.
Thank you.
Yay! Shout out to Keir for being always such an incredible guest. Don't forget to leave a review for BlockDrops in your streaming platform of choice, and learn all about the show at blockdropspodcast.xyz. This is all for today. Stay rare, stay weird. LFG.